Ugh, where do I even start with this? For those who have been with me since I started doing the reviewer thing, the first video I released was on Onimusha Warlords. And for a few years I followed this up with its sequels and other Capcom games and properties. Moving on primarily to the Mega Man Battle Network games with time as, well, they're the other large Capcom property that have had an impact on me personally. But before that, I had originally intended to follow the Onimusha game reviews with ones focused around a different popular property that played very similarly to Onimusha, and that being Devil May Cry. And why didn't I? And why did it take, 8 years for me to swing back to it? Well, it's for one kinda major reason that I'd actually forgotten until I sat down to play Devil May Cry 1 again. The games defy my usual review style as they're, well, that basic. Or at least the first one is. That is to say, there aren't things of merit here. The Devil May Cry games exude style, and encourage players to get better and better at the mechanics, even warning people to speedrun through the various stages and their sequential missions. Yet in doing so, they kind of rob, well, actually focusing on any emphasis on story. And that's pretty much been my hang-up in actually talking about the first game in the series. Which, hey, not every game needs some elaborate story, and a game is not by default bad just because it doesn't focus on having a deep, compelling narrative. But around here on my show, I always tend to emphasize the importance of story and writing. And a lot of Capcom games have hinged their success on the story and setup for such events of player experiences being grounded enough to go along with the journey. Resident Evil 2 is heavily based around exploration, and that the characters are trying to escape a limited-scope zombie apocalypse. But what is made engaging about it is the story segments that give and build character, especially in the remake. Onimusha Warlords puts you in the shoes of a samurai trying to save someone abducted for a demonic ritual, with the game stages all being built around that mission, and the trials taken to obtain the tools to enable that salvation, with additional information in both games being made available through story primer books placed inside the depths of the game's environment you can take the time to look up. And both games I bring up in this because they were made before Devil May Cry was, and by the same people. Director Hideki Kamiya and writers Noboru Sugimura, who had come in to fit just a stride of successful collaboration since Noboru Sugimura left Toei after writing the Super Sentai series that eventually became the source material for Mighty Morphin Power Rangers and Power Rangers Zeo. Yes, seriously, if you've not seen my previous reviews on this subject, there are common names attached to all of them. It's not even a 6 degrees of separation game going for them. The two of them are responsible for a large amount of Capcom successes in the late 90s and early 2000s with their collaboration. Hell, that connection ends up being made even more hilarious by Devil May Cry's franchise-wide casting choices. In Japanese, Dante is voiced by Toshiyuki Morikawa, who we've discussed before in older reviews as best being known for playing Tekkaman Blade, Final Fantasy's Sephiroth, and Wise God Torin from the Sentai series Kyoryuger. His English voice actors have changed a few times, starting with Drew Combs in the original, Matthew Kaninsky in Devil May Cry 2, and most recently stuntman-turned-voice actor Ruben Langdon from Devil May Cry 3 onwards, including Dante's guest appearances in other franchises. Ruben is most relevant for this parallel, as he started his career by playing Beef Fighter Yanma in the tokusatsu series Beef Fighter Kabuto, which Saban used as the source material for Beetleborg's Metallics. This then further informs the hilarity of the other casting choices for Dante's extended family in English language, his twin brother Virgil being voiced by Daniel Southworth, who is otherwise best known for playing Eric Myers, the Quantum Ranger in Power Rangers Time Force, and Dante's eventual nephew Nero in turn being voiced by the ever-appreciated Johnny-Yon Bosch, who likewise got his start in acting via the Power Rangers series, their adaptation of Noboru Sugimura's work, which brings the entire backstory for the franchise full circle. So basically, the franchise was created by two nerds who have a thing for tokusatsu, and in the Western market, the main heroes of it are voiced by former Toku actors. There are no coincidences. But this differing focus on their attention for the game was, in part, because the Devil May Cry games drew from them a different basis than the other titles. DMC was meant to be a speedrunning action game instead of a more methodical, exploratory, and puzzle-solving game like Resident Evil and Onimusha were at the time. While DMC originally started out conceptually and by location from initial plans for Resident Evil 4, The game series actually drew its chief inspiration from the 1989 adventure game Strider Hiryu, and its own development started as an update to the game for then modern standards when their Resident Evil 4 plans were scrapped. But they were developed over time into something distinctly different due to the evolution in available game engines the PlayStation 2 offered, alongside the team wanting to exploit a gameplay bug they'd found during development of Onimusha Warlords that allowed a player to potentially juggle enemies in the air if they were hit consecutively enough, which gave them ideas about an entire playstyle based off of air chain juggling. And since Capcom had been seeing success with their lead characters fighting some form of monsters, it was pretty clear it was wise to continue the trend. Resident Evil had the zombies and bioterrorism stuff covered. The Onimusha series had the focus on period piece, Eastern mythos-based demons. Hell, the Mega Man franchise was covering busting robots and viruses between its two timelines. Thus it makes sense for a new property to take on Western-based myths, demons, and monsters themselves. Even though they already had a franchise that did that. It was called Darkstalkers. Oh wow, is it possible that Devil May Cry is the reason why Darkstalkers went dormant? I mean, it would explain all those crossover games where Dante and Morgan flirt. This also explains why the series has an overtly Western aesthetic, not just because it was Kamiya drawing stuff out of a hat and meshing it together with what he felt looked and acted cool, as he is on occasion described the process of making Devil May Cry being, but just attempting to bring to life something more distinct than everything else Capcom was already doing, as the man doesn't necessarily like to repeat overlap himself with other active productions. But that is again the trouble I have when addressing Devil May Cry, as there's honestly not that much to say as it's primarily an action game you're meant to speedrun through. Hell, I eventually got around to beating it in under 6 hours. Which isn't a bad thing. I can clear the original Onimusha in about that same amount of time. I can clear Zone of the Enders the second runner in under 3 hours normally too. And yet, with both of those games, I felt like I got more out of it. I don't know what it is, guys, as I do like Devil May Cry. I adore its protagonist Dante and his serious yet carefree attitude and job he takes in dealing with demonic attacks out in random areas of the world. Having a demon hunter as a protagonist in a contemporary setting? That sounds like a premise that could keep an audience watching for, say, I don't know, 15 seasons, give or take some production delays. But yeah, in Devil May Cry, you play as Dante Sparta, offspring of the demonic knight Sparta and a human woman, who spends his life styling himself as a demon hunter for hire, and in the first game ends up hired by a woman named Trish to hunt down some demons, with the invoked complication being that Trish is a dead ringer for his dead mother. Yeah, parental issues. What can I say? He's half human, on his mother's side. And yes, I love pissing off Doctor Who fans by making that reference whenever I can. Dante as a character, in the few scenes we have of him being a character, just has a certain swagger to him that is endlessly endearing. He's clearly a flawed person, the anime addition to the series makes that very clear. But in the end, he's just one of those rebellious personaed characters that loves having fun even with the duty his lineage bears to keep humanity safe from the monsters in the dark. I personally take that in meaning that it's how he copes with the horrors he's witnessed. That it's easier to make a joke or quip in the face of the serious murder, death, kill types. And because his personal ego is underplayed and not flaunted, it actually helps that get the guy to work. Why it doesn't work with other people who have tried to copy Dante is they try and utilize a more emo angle. A variation of things that makes the copies come off as nihilistic and uncaring about anything but themselves. When by comparison, Dante just enjoys what he does, and the chances it gives him to mouth off at those who truly deserve it.
Are you the human, the son of Sparta who challenges the darkness for this?
Block off, Featherface, or you can stick around and find out the hard way.
And I love how Kamiya later calls back to that line nearly a decade later. The game's event takes these two to the isolated Mallet Island, where the demons are infesting what I presume to be a monastery? Who builds structures like this out on isolated islands? Regardless, the demons here worship Mundus, the former ruler of Hell, who has a complicated history with the Sparta clan himself. Dante's father was previously Mundus's right hand in his conquest of the demon world, but 2,000 years before the current day, Sparta rebelled against him when Mundus set his eyes on the human world, as Sparta for the most part liked humans and their rebellious spirits. To stop him, Sparta burned the lion's share of his power to seal Mundus within Mallet Island. the lock tied to Sparta's signature weapon, the Force Edge, and 2 amulets that together combine themselves into a sword sharing Sparta's name. And as you can probably tell, there's something up with Dante, the son of Sparta, being called to a place where only those with his bloodline would have the tools available to break the seal on Mundus. And yeah, Trish is in on that plot, though it's not until very late in the game that this fact is revealed. But that also explains why emphasizing story doesn't matter as much with DMC1, as the entire location is just one long guiding series of death traps that would make it easier for Mundus to get what he wants from who he feels is an easier target of attack than the actual one he wants vengeance on. Not helped in that Sparta himself disappeared years ago. Thus the only way to freedom is via the Sons of Sparta. And yes, sons plural, as Dante's a twin with his sibling Virgil, who is introduced as the Black Knight Nelo, Angelo, we encounter several times throughout the game, whose mind has been twisted into being a slave to Mundus' will due to earlier events in the timeline. Incidentally, Nelo Angelo is a misromanization for Nero Angelo, the name literally translating as Black Angel, as a tip-off to the character's true identity. But whoever was doing the translating didn't exactly catch the LR misromanization back in the day, which frustratingly still happens. But for those not familiar with the series, you are probably asking yourselves, wait, what previous events? Yeah, about that. Devil May Cry 1 is not chronologically the first DMC game with regards to the series' internal timeline, despite it being the game that started it all. The earliest events of it are actually depicted in Devil May Cry 3. Then DMC 1 happens, followed by the Devil May Cry anime, which, by the way, I really liked. But was actually made after DMC 3 came out. Then DMC 2 happens, with it then followed by Devil May Cry 4, and finally the most recent entry, Devil May Cry 5. And the characters' appearances and other stuff like Marvel vs. Capcom and Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne just being said to be, yeah, this happened, my life is weird. Also, there's that one DMC reboot game, but no one likes that one nor pretends to dignify it. Hell, I don't even own a copy of it. Even mentioning it anymore is going to make fans of the series shout, sacrilege! But as you can tell from the continuity of the series, well, it's just easier to play stuff in release order than trying to untangle that larger snarl by doing it in event chronological like I would normally try to do. Even hardcore fans don't just really sweat the small stuff on the matter, since most of the hardcore crowd are more likely to riff on the fact that a lot of people have to play the games on easy mode simply because normal mode is that unforgiving. And yeah, I'm one of those people. I have made no secret how much I suck at more action-oriented games despite the worlds they try and set up being intriguing to me. And I did try to play the game on normal at first, but I just really could not do it. I did manage to get a third of the way through the game before I got stuck in the normal difficulty, but beyond that, it was just an insurmountable wall, and I had to reset and unlock easy mode for the rest of this playthrough that I recorded. Like, maybe it's just an example of how bad my hands are getting, as work has kind of been mauling the tendons in my hands the last few years. I do remember years ago being able to beat the game on normal. Maybe it was because I hadn't played the game in years, so my muscle memory was all out of whack for it. I don't know, but yeah, I'm one of those people that have to go through easy mode to do stuff. The irony of that is, though, that while the later games all tried their best to focus a bit more on story to ground the setting and make people invested in events, the original Devil May Cry game is still scored as the best of them, with its only real competitor ending up being Devil May Cry 5. That isn't to say 2 through 4 didn't score well, though Devil May Cry 2 is considered to have the worst score of the main games simply because there's ways to break the game to make it too easy to play. The reason in my mind why the series does so well is just the insistence on the games with regards to getting you to develop the skills and talents to be good at annihilating the opposition. Learn the combo chains, learn how to move Dante in the most precise manner, learn the strats of every enemy you can so you know how to counter them, and just gain skill to dominate. I do appreciate those things and that focus without it being an insanely hard meat grind like, say, some later games designed themselves to be. But no matter the encouragement the game tries to make, well, there are just people who for varying reasons won't be able to meet that demand. But with it being the first, it's also the simplest with regards to what you can do. Outside of Dante's starting weapon, a pair of handguns, and the Force Edge, you can gain a much faster acting sword that becomes basically the default weapon of the game, a pair of gauntlets, a shotgun, a grenade launcher, and I'm not even sure what this gun is, but it uses energy fast. The Devil Arms, Dante's demon-derived weapons, are all upgradable with time and a proper collection of demon souls to power them. Though the best thing to learn from is just the ability to double jump up to secret paths and collectible upgrades all throughout the game. Making things easier on progression, though, is Dante's Devil Trigger, the capacity for him to use his demon-blooded origins to change himself into a demonic form himself for short periods. I admit, I only really use the Devil Trigger when facing the bosses, because the boss battles in this game, well, they're the most obnoxious part, unfortunately. You only really face 5 different bosses through things. The aforementioned Virgil, the giant magma spider scorpion that is a right pain, a flying beast bioweapon named Griffin, and an amorphous blob named Nightmare that if you hit certain icons around its battlefield, cause it to solidify so you can attack it. None of these fights are easy, and all of them not only have unique conditions to fight them properly, the game also makes you fight each of them 3 times, with each repeat having them steadily hold back less and less, as a sign of whether you've learned to avoid and counter their mechanics correctly. If you've not, you're going to die. A lot. The game does not hold your hand on this, and good games understand a line between fair difficulty and functional game mechanics, with DMC being on the side that it certainly isn't the mechanics that are the problem, and it does require players to learn the right ways to fight them. If you have, great! The game challenges you to try and beat them again on harder and harder laps if you can. But as it's an early 2000s game, well, control can sometimes be not as great as you want it to be, and some of the controls can still elude you. The special move trigger is used a lot to try and find random collectibles, and sometimes it does require experimenting and seeking out esoteric secrets to find special secret missions and progression artifacts that are just that well hidden. The game does not like to hold one's hand, so remembering where and how to get them ends up being a pretty sizable challenge, especially when trying to speedrun through the varied missions of the games to get their highest ranks, which sometimes requires you to not fight even though you need to fight to get the resources you need to succeed. It's certainly a different juggling act than Kamiya and Sugimura's other works, to be sure, where the game almost seems to encourage you to do more with less, which does kind of fit the design philosophy of, hey, here's Dante. He's a fun-loving, rebellious badass who can do it all without the need for the buffs. Which, I admit, since I'm mainly an RPG fan who prefers to get all the resources I can to power level myself above challenges so I wouldn't be as debilitated by my own control issues, it's against the entire mindset I have developed as a gamer over the decades to do. I like collecting everything. I like maxing out my inventory. Within reason, obviously. And as long as the controls for a game aren't terrible, I like grinding up to unlock the best skills one can get on a character. Thus, I'm not exactly enthused by game systems that encourage avoiding all of these things that are clearly there to make our lives easier, just to gain a slightly better score. When I've never been one to care all that much about game scoring when what I'm after is the experience. Like, yeah, I get it. What is most cathartic to end a game with will differ by person, so getting to slap up that S rank is an achievement trophy in and of itself. But chasing the legendary difficulty S rank unlockable, that's never quite been for me. Now, perfect ending completion flags? Those I'll chase endlessly. Like, I've played Final Fantasy X-2 like 20 times in my life trying to get 100%. So let's move to wrap this. After clearing out the deepest depths of the island's facility, we find Mundus is already deep into his plans for revival, ready to break out simply by Dante being here, and finally led by Trish straight to him. With the seal fracturing, and Dante still defending her even though Trish is openly admitted to working for Mundus, which he knew all along, but decided to give the benefit of the doubt due to the resemblance to his mom. And when it's outed that Trish was just created to be a weakness to be exploited, she in turn saves his life. This loss actually makes Dante really, really mad, and instead of creating a weakness, it caused him to take a level in badass and awaken his true demon form, by which to just stomp on Mundus in a pretty enjoyable 3-stage brawl. Seriously, unlike the interim boss battles, I don't actually have a hard time with Mundus. It's very strange to me. But with Mundus seemingly taken care of as his great revival ritual has failed, well, all Dante's left with is another corpse in his life. And thus leading to...
I should have saved you. I should have been the one to fill your dark soul with light!
The franchise's biggest internet meme! Yeah, you can kinda see why the game series eventually shifted around voice actors for Dante. Ruben Langdon really does just better personify Dante as the goofball he is. Better than any of the others which try to take too much of a drama angle to things. But the failed ritual is causing the entire island to collapse, so it's time to escape. The game challenging you to race out the way you came, only for Mundus to try stopping us. Yeah, that's bad. For him. Yeah, turns out Trish was only mostly dead, overcharging Dante's guns to literally shoot his family's nemesis dead, them escaping, and Trish joining Dante in hunting demons till they're dead. Like most people will tell you, Devil May Cry is great, though admittedly dated, but it's dated in such a way that it actually retains what it was supposed to be good at and gamers focused on. The speedrun to beating it. Though, yeah, I personally still just like the Onimusha franchise the most of these early 2000s PlayStation game series about destroying monsters attacking the world. I guess I'm just more engaged by that kind of historical fiction than what the DMC side of stuff brings to the table. I hope I've made it clear that I do enjoy these games too, but it runs aground of my issues with a lot of action games in that I suck at them for reasons I can't truly correct, and an internal dynamic with them that just goes against my own sensibilities. But I can still avoid most deaths as long as I'm paying attention to the right ways to fight stuff in here. It's not fully for me, as I'll never be able to take things to all the play extremes the game wants me to reach for, but that's not a bad thing, and I still enjoy what I can do and engage with. Just, please, for the love of God, let me stop having to fight that goddamn spider! I'll be taking a look at more stuff that features Dante in the future, too. Not quite a full retrospective on the character per se, just that a number of things I want to review also happen to feature the guy. Thus, I couldn't put off doing a video on at the very least his first game any longer. And all of those are in the works. Though, maybe I should give DMC2 its day in court first, considering the complaints that one has attached to it. A matter for another day. You know, I'm just realizing I have no good place on my shelf anymore to put the actual media I am reviewing. Probably move the red frame ashtray off of this. This is kind of like becoming the Gow Ranger shelf. Hopefully that'll stay up there. It did not.